Hi, my name is Divya. I lead healthcare vertical at Ag Grants, and today we are going to have a very interesting discussion about the topic which I am also trying to personally understand and I'm interested in, which is digital public goods. And as everyone knows, that digital public good has become a very important aspect of the agenda at G20 this year. Digital public goods is defined as something that's open source, open data, open access, open protocols, open standards. They are freely available and can be customized according to the context of the country that they are getting deployed in. Uh, there's an organization called the Digital Public Good Alliance, which currently gives out certifications to various digital public goods. And as they define it, that even though it is open source, open data, open protocols, so on and so forth, they also have to take into consideration the privacy standards and laws that are followed in the particular country. Along with, they should contribute to one or more sustainable development goals. So this is a little bit about DPGs. However, there is a lot of questions that are surrounding this ecosystem, like whether DPGs mean freedom or whether they are free, and that is the advantage that they have. What is the kind of digital transformation they actually have the potential to bring about? And lastly, do they actually make everything accessible and equitable for the most marginalized communities? Or actually they make it inaccessible due to the digital divide that exists in the country. So these are some of the questions I would like to demystify with the panel that I have here today. So I have with me Sandeep Singhal, who is the co-founder Nexus Venture Partners and also anchor for Act for Health. We have Neeraj Jain. He's country director India, director South Asia at Path. We also have Vishal, who is the director Tech for Good at Nasscom Foundation. And finally, we have Gaurav, who is the founder and CEO of Samagra. So I'm going to start off the panel by asking you, Sandeep, that digital public goods is not a new topic. They've been around for quite a while now. According to you, why is there a sudden surge in interest for digital public goods, and why is the time opportune to talk about this and deploy and develop DPGs? And also, if you could highlight some of the work that ACT is doing with the DPGs and what have been some of the key learnings.
Yeah, I think the point you made the point that DPGs have existed for a while. Um that's true. In fact, there is a open healthcare information system platform called DHSI2, which was developed by the University of Oslo in the 90s, right? And it's still around, keeps getting updated, and so on. So as a concept, this has existed for a while. What has really changed is what the extension of DPG is this notion of digital public infrastructure, DPI. And DPI and DPG get used interchangeably. But if you look at what Aadhaar, UPI, what they are basically DPIs. They're not, although they're thought of as DPGs, they're DPIs. And what has happened is with the success of at least these two DPIs, it has suddenly sort of woken everybody up to the possibility of digital public goods, right? So all of a sudden you have 1.3 billion people whose identity is easily accessible and very easily verifiable with Aadhaar. Now that gives a underlying platform on which a lot of things can be done, which haven't been done anywhere globally. So this is a requirement that is true not just in developing countries like India. This is a requirement that developed countries need. In fact, during COVID, when checks had to be sent to US sort of beneficiaries, they had a very tough time. So in India, everything was done through direct benefit transfers. The US couldn't do that because they didn't have a deduplicated identity mechanism. So that, and then subsequently with UPI, again, to your point, open standards, not necessarily open source. UPI isn't open source, but it's open standards, it's open data, all of that. So what it has done, I think it's more an imagination of what is possible if you take this approach. And you specifically talked about G20. I think obviously India has been the biggest beneficiary of this DPI deployment, and that is now being applied in other areas of governance. So whether it is health, whether it is education, and other areas, and I think between our panelists, they will talk about each of these areas and how we are sort of moving forward on that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sandeep. I would actually want to ask the next question to Vishal. So, Vishal, I think DPG as a topic is very confusing for a lot of people, and you have an extensive experience of working in the IT sector. So, first of all, I would ask from you in terms of tech, from the tech perspective, what are the components that actually constitute the DPG? If you can just answer that for the audience.
Yeah, so um, this is nothing new when it comes to the tech world, right? Interoperability, meaning can two systems interact with each other? Can it be easily done, right? In a US, you might see EMR, right? Electronic medical record, because if different doctors, different medical units will send a disease code or something in a different format, then it won't be understandable. That's where they defined EMRs, right, to standardize that thing. Same thing is this digital public infrastructure and all, right, where you standardize the thing at the core so that different systems start interacting with each other. And that's where digital public good concepts stand on top of DPI. This is a technology view of it, but it is nothing but where standardization is kind of getting started at the core, and that's how you can see it.
And also, Vishal, just wanting to ask you another question on why and what kind of digital good or digital technology should become a digital public good, and what is the advantage that a digital technology has to do so.
Yeah, so as a part of Nasscom Foundation, we have one big program called Big Tech, where we give us softwares to NGOs, and we have like 15,000 NGOs in India who come out and take those softwares. Under that when I started, taking that role and started understanding how it is operating, then that's where we realized that one side, these NGOs and NPOs, they are already working on a low resource setting. Having any tech guy is like almost impossible for them to hire, right? And then when they call their MIS and the core systems which they work on, those are like very basic systems, Excels and base softwares. When you start introducing them to the digital world, it is very difficult for them to first comprehend, understand, and then even if you push it and they get it, right, then the maintenance cost and all those costs will be kind of very difficult. So this digital public infrastructure and digital public good is nothing but, can we look at the collaborative approach? Can we look at the synergy model, right, where you can start putting a systems in a certain context which can have a similarity. For example, right, on the NGOs who are working in education, skilling, literacy, can we give them a basic learning management platform which is built on an open source? Maybe we can make it little more bigger, which can connect to the basic core infrastructure which government is trying to build, or the different apps which government is trying to build. Can we take this whole thing there? And if we can take that whole thing there, means it can automatically come under a digital public good arena. So that's how we need to start thinking and start putting these things if we really want to get that done.
Great. Thank you so much, Vishal. I am now going to move on to Neeraj. Neeraj, can you tell the audience a little bit about Digital Square, which is a path led initiative? They work closely with the DPGA. What are the aims and objectives of Digital Square? What does it want to achieve? And who are the key stakeholders, according to you, who need to collaborate in the future to bring about large scale digital transformation?
Thanks a lot, Divya. Firstly, before I go to your question, I just want to shout out to ACT. I'm a big fan of Act Grants from the day it started. I'm available 24/7 in case they need any help, and will be, and keep continue doing the work. I was worried they're going to shut down after COVID, but thank you for continuing. So firstly, there's a lot of jargon that's flying around. So you need you need to be careful. I mean, I was recently at a G20 meeting in Kumarakam with a room full of heavyweights trying to come to an agreement on the definition of DPIs. And I can tell you, we were on a boat, we were in the lake, we came back after 4 hours, and we did not have an agreement. We were not even close to getting to an agreement. So let's not, get stuck with that, because I don't think that agreement will happen. It's because there's intellectual property which starts playing in. There's always going to be somebody who benefits from a certain word versus another person who's not. And more and more, when we think about digital public infrastructure, which is DPIs, which we don't have a definition for, or digital public goods, which again we probably don't have a definition for, uh, you know, this is mostly related to low and middle income countries, or it is more sort of targeted at benefiting those. Having said that, I'm not saying that high income countries are not going to benefit from that. Coming to digital square, so if you think, the name itself kind of gives us away. We're digital and we're a square. It's a program that Path started in 2017 in the US. And the idea was pretty simple, and the idea keeps evolving, right? So we've just got a new strategy which is coming out, which is on the website. But the idea, very simply, is that there is a lot of duplication that's happening within digital interventions, digital designs, etc. How do we reduce duplication of that effort? How do we not reinvent the wheel? We're constantly the same. There are coders who are writing the same kind of code again and again and again. How do we stop doing that? There is very little coordination. There's hardly any coordination between the various people who are working. I mean, right now, India is trying to sort of get into this whole electronic medical record space, and I think there are probably about 100 organizations who have something, working on something, are going to get there very soon. So so use available tools, available mechanisms as much as possible. And so Digital Square kind of becomes like a marketplace, right? Trying to sort of convene everybody, trying to bring everybody together, even in terms of the way it's funded. I know in the last conversation, the last panel, we were talking about funding mechanisms. So Digital Square is actually funded by, I think, 16 or 17 different donors who have actually come together, who are interested in digital impact on health, and they've funded that whole operation. So it's like a funding, a marketplace in that sense. But it also brings demand to there. So if we've got working in 50 odd countries, so talking to country governments, what are their needs? What is the kind of infrastructure they already have? What do they need to build to actually deliver some of these services, or to roll some of these services out? If you think about UPI, for example, there is something behind it. It didn't start yesterday. It's been built over years. There was a platform, and then everybody sort of went and got into it. The same way the health mission of India, the National Digital Health Mission, they're doing exactly the same thing, building that basic infrastructure that everybody could latch on to. The idea is to bring all partners into the room. So governments, investors, innovators, bring them all together, and also try to improve the way that the global community is thinking about designing, about how they use digital solutions, and also how they pay for it, and how much they pay for it. A lot of us can't afford it. A lot of us in LMICs can't afford to pay high amounts of money. Having said that, I mean, our vaccination certificate was pretty good, compared to, especially, I was traveling to Ladakh with a friend of mine who came from the US, and we landed, and the lady in uniform asked us for our certificates. Of course, I flashed my phone. He took out this little piece of paper from his wallet, And she said, no, this is not what I want. I want your certificate. He said, this is my certificate. So it took us a while to convince her, but we managed to get through. So that was, that's where we are. I think the key objective is to increase availability, adaptability, and maturity. That's an important one also. What is the maturity level of that digital solution that we're looking at? And then sort of certify it, declare it as a global public good, which then can go out across many, many countries. So that's pretty much what Digital Square does. And, I think underlying all of this is thinking about what is your local infrastructure that's available, what is the context that we are operating in. Democratic Republic of Congo and India have differences. What are those differences, and are we actually nuancing our solutions based on those differences? What are the capacities on the ground? I mean, we're lucky in India. We have a fantastic, our human resources are great. But if you go to some of the smaller countries, I know we're working in Nepal right now, we're working in Bangladesh. There are challenges, so, working around that. So I'll stop at that.
So, Neeraj, I do have a follow up question, but I'll come back to you in a minute. So, Gaurav, my next question is to you. So Samagra X is focused on building open source products, platforms, and protocols. You work very closely with the government organizations and have also two very interesting initiatives called Code for GovTech and Work from Campus programs, which have gained significant traction. So my first question to you will be that how have you leveraged existing DPGs to build people-centric solutions?
Yeah, so let me explain that with an example. So let me pick an example from agriculture, not one of the ACT verticals, but nonetheless brings about the point of how DPGs can be leveraged to really solve for the end user. And this is an example from Odisha agriculture. There we've been working with the state for a few years now, and very recently, just a couple of months back, the team kind of was doing a brainstorming, and they tried to combine three different DPGs, two DPGs and one more. So one was ChatGPT, which is not a DPG, but something that had come out recently. There's something called UCI, Unified Communications Interface, which is a building block that we had kind of worked with Nexus Foundation a couple of years back, and it's a DPG. And the third is Bhashini. Some of you might have heard of Bhashini. It is kind of housed at IIT Madras, and it can translate from any Indian language to any other Indian language. Speech to text, text to text, speech to speech, and so on. So the problem statement was farmer advisory. Customized advisory needs to be provided to farmers, and there are 7.5 million, 75 lakh farmers in the state of Odisha for their crop. Technical advisory that needs to be provided. So the solution that emerged out of the brainstorming was, can we get a farmer to really ask a question, a technical question in Odia on a UCI, Unified Communications Interface powered bot. This text in Odia will through Bhashini get converted. So sorry, this voice in Odia from Bhashini will get converted to English text. This English text can then go to the accumulated advisory content, expert advisory content that has been kind of over the years, database of that has been created in the state. And the relevant matches would be found. These matches will then be sent to GPT-3, which will convert it into, will give a conversational response for the farmer to that in English text, which will go to Bhashini, which will convert it to Odia text, which through a unified communications interface bot reach the farmer, right? So it's really it's just connecting the dots, right? So these things exist. So for example, as a entity, we are not creating these individual blocks per se, but the understanding of those and combining it with the realities of the ground can help innovate and push the envelope of what's possible. So this got created in 3 weeks. This POC, a small proof of concept, got created in 3 weeks. There was a massive Krushi Mela in the state, which happens annually, got tested there, got very good response from the farmers. And the next week it was launched by the governor for statewide kind of adoption. Of course, there's a journey, governments gets excited, launch happens before something is ready, but then there is a step-by-step process over the next 6 to 9 months to really scale it up to all farmers in the state. So there's pilot with 10,000 farmers, it scale up to 1 lakh, and then we'll kind of, so test for accuracy, because you cannot kind of mess up with the advisory that is going because there's some fancy tech at the back end. But the power of DPGs is exactly this, right? They will be DPGs, but then there will be a set of people who will leverage these DPGs to solve for real use cases on the ground. And a lot of organizations in this room, for instance, I would imagine do that. And that also needs to be enabled. A lot of challenges to that, but we can come to that later.
So Gaurav, you said a very interesting point on how government was, because it was something relatable and required on ground, it got taken up by the government pretty quickly. But that is not a trend that we have seen generally, right? So what do you think that whosoever, wants to build a DPG, what should the problem statements be for them to actually get adopted by the government for sustainability?
Yeah, so if you think from a government perspective, I don't care whether it's a DPG or not. I don't care whether it's open source or not, right? I want my problem to get solved faster, cheaper, better, right? I'm not as an IAS officer, I'm not a technologist. I don't really care what's the technology behind it, right? So if DPGs have to be in that sense, quote unquote, sold not financially, but generally kind of to convince the government, it has to be on the back of that it provides speed and it provides quality. That means it saves cost. So you have to solve for something. If you were to do it the normal way, create a large monolithic system, it will take a year. If you to leverage DPGs and configure them and so on, it'll take a month, right? That has to be the pitch to the government. But there's a challenge here. The government is not going to do it on its own. It needs a technology partner, a technology vendor, in-house or external, to be able to help the government do that. And that's where sometimes the incentives are not aligned. That technology partner, that technology vendor would want to have a longer contract, typically with the government. I'm just generalizing, so that their revenue stream kind of increases. But if they were to use these building blocks or these DPGs at the back end, then that kind of gets somewhere compromised, and the 1 year work can be done in 2 months. So there's a certain kind of conflict of interest. The incentives are not aligned. However, with the traction that this debate and this discussion on DPG is getting, I foresee an inflection point where when the different technology players that are working with the government, this will become a USP, that we have the understanding of the DPGs, we can leverage them, we can deliver it faster, we can deliver it population scale better, and then not having that, not leveraging will become a disadvantage. Today that's not the case. Today still there is resistance because, as I'm saying, incentives are not really aligned. But I see that changing sooner than later in the coming kind of couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years. Yeah.
Nice.
So we had one of the case like that. We developed an app called Safe Food, Share Food, which has been adopted by FSSAI, and we've been to that journey where we initially built that core piece of tech supported by ops to kind of get things done, work with them, and then they started seeing a value in it, and that's how it got adopted by them. But it's a long fetch process, and as he said, right, the tech vendor have to be supporting it. You need to have value attached to it. You need to have ops working out it. Means even if you build a fancy tech, it's of no use if it is not usable enough and you don't prove it with the data, and that's a big cycle. Means you have to be really lucky to get that done.
Yeah, I think it's, but I would say, Vishal, it's more than luck. So I'll sort of, since you mentioned the fact that IT industry has worked on open source for a long time, right? So I don't think Linux is luck. Linux has gotten built over time in iterative form around people that really cared about creating an open source ecosystem, right? So, and then there have been other technologies like Apache and so on that have continuously gotten built in that stack. We are, that journey started 20 years ago, even earlier. We are now starting to see that journey starting to be discussed in the context of vertical solutions. So whether it is education, whether it is healthcare, I think that ecosystem needs to be built to make that successful. So to your point, if there has to be a technology provider that is always required to make that change, then this issue that you brought up, that your NGOs are just not, they don't have the capacity to absorb it, right? So that tech deployment has to be as easy as you downloading an app on your iPhone or your Android. And that is what a NGO should be able to do. So going back to this point, why will DPGs succeed now? One of the reasons that DPGs will succeed is because there's a consumerization of tech. So today, you don't realize it, but you're using productivity tools that are much better than what organizations used 30 years ago. It's as simple as that. You are using your Excel on your phone is better than anybody's Excel was at that point in time, right? So there is a fundamental shift on what is available now, and it's sort of usability. There was no context of UI UX 30 years ago. People didn't talk about that. Today, a UI UX designer is probably getting paid one of the highest salaries in a company, right? So there is a shift that's happening, which I think we have to understand. Why will DPGs work, and what is required in DPGs? So DPGs have to be fundamentally very, very easy to use. They have to be very, very easy to deploy, which means they have to be cloud based. They cannot be on premise. Obviously, that brings in issues around data security, data privacy, and so on. Particularly in health, that becomes even a bigger issue. But all those problems have been solved. Today, your information, your financial information, your health information, everything is being shared on the cloud, whether you like it or not. So why do you share it? You send, your mobile banking information is going on the cloud. Why do you share it? You share it because you believe that the bank has done all the work in the back end to keep it private and to keep it secure. I think the same thing will happen with DPGs. And interestingly, open source software today is more secure than proprietary software. It's actually gone the other way. That today, security software is preferred to be open source. So when we are making investments from Nexus, we are looking for open source companies to invest behind, not closed source companies. So I think that is a very fundamental shift that's happened. Now, what does that do? So we had a company called DimDim that was in the communication software. We had funded this in 2007. And this was a basic tool built out of Hyderabad, open sourced. It was the first tool that in that area that was open source, competing with WebEx and other sort of, at that time, Zoom and all didn't exist. So basically with WebEx. Guess what happened? That software tool got converted into e-learning software, that got converted into Turkish solution, a Swahili solution, and so on. And there was no IT person involved. Even the company wasn't involved. This DimDim company sitting in Hyderabad only found out that somebody was using it in Turkey because somebody posted this in a GitHub saying that this is a Turkish solution. So what happens, and again, this is very early days in the deployment of DPGs, but as ecosystems get created and open source software on the commercial side has shown us that it is possible that there are enough, and I don't know if some of you heard when, I guess, who said that tech people are good. I think Mekin said this in the morning, right? Tech people are basically good. And this notion of tech for good, the point that Nasscom Foundation is working on, and code for governance, right? I think those are all pointing to the fact that these communities will get created and these DPGs will get deployed without the need for IT involvement.
Sandeep, you covered a few very interesting points on how the time is opportune for DPGs and giving examples of Linux, Apache. When internet also started, it was supposed to be an open source thing, right? But then over the years, it got completely shifted to becoming proprietary. And one of the reasons for that was that sustainability is a big issue, right, when it comes to digital public goods. As you said, there are people, techies, who want to develop something, but how do we sustain it beyond the development point and take it to the next level? And how do we give accountability to people that they have to really take care of this platform? Because we also see a lot of dead end for most of the DPGs, at least from the health perspective. Pretty soon there are only 1-2 examples. So
See, I think there is no harm if somebody charges for something. but in a competitive setting. So again, I go back 20 years ago, people would charge $1 million to deploy SAP in the organization. Over time, other tools came in and SAP had to lower its price. So if you look at it today, you know, bandwidth is a great example. Bandwidth is now so cheap. Why is it cheap? Because it became competitive. Why did it become competitive? Because there were open standards which allowed any telecom provider to provide you a solution that could compete with anybody else in the market. So as long as you had a GSM phone or you had a CDMA phone, you could easily switch carriers. And even that today it's happening, right? Today, if I don't like Vodafone, I go to Airtel. If I don't like Airtel, I go to Reliance, and I do that in a matter of a day. So I think the more important thing is creating that open competitive environment. Proprietary is not the problem now. It's the point of open source is anybody, any of you sitting here can take Linux today, create your version of Linux and support it. But that's what Google did with Android, right? Android is nothing other than Linux. But they took it, they created something out of it, right? So I think that is where, again, I see DPGs going, that the best DPG will win at the end of the day, because people will flock to the easiest to use, easiest to deploy solution.
So just to build on what the way you were saying and what Sandeep said, so the couple of challenges in this DPG space as of today. One is the challenge of adoption, right? They're not as matured, as user-centric, as evolved, that you can, it's not in a self-serve mode. A lot of the organizations sitting here, while all of this sounds very good, DPGs and the power of it, what is possible, but most would struggle to leverage them to really solve something of need in their respective organizations, in their respective spheres of work, even if they and tech talent is not easy to get, but even if they have one, it's difficult. The other side is on the DPG builder side. So people who are building, organizations which are building DPGs, could be a eager foundation, a XTEF foundation, a lot of the foundations that are building this thing, all of them are largely philanthropically funded. So there's a fundamental question on the long-term sustainability of some of the DPG, but even the short run, while they are funded, there's always a conscious prioritization that needs to be done in terms of what features should get added to the DPG and so on. You cannot meet the requirement of everyone. So it's a challenge both on the adoption side as well as on the building of DPG side. One of the experiments that we did last year and which is now kind of scaling up, what Sandeep mentioned, is Code for GovTech. What it aims to, it will not fully solve for this, but at least partially address these challenges, which is to catalyze a community of open source contributors towards the digital public goods. So these are coding talent in colleges across the country, coding talent internationally, a lot of Indians outside who kind of are in this field, coding talent in the startup world who want to contribute, really galvanize them, make them aware of these DPGs, get them to be proficient on them such that they can support with adoption of DPGs to a large number of not-for-profits and also sometimes in the government, as well as to the building of these DPGs. So really it's about the objective of Code for GovTech is to get the public at the center of the digital public good, right? The public part is largely missing if you really come to think of it today. It's from use case perspective, yes, user perspective, yes, but not from a contribution building perspective. The way it tries to do that is just, I'll briefly 30 seconds share that. There are two parts to it. One is a very deep mentoring program for this community. So last year there was a pilot of it. This year there will be 100 projects. There will be 50 plus mentors, 25 plus organizations that are building DPGs. They will get and handhold, mentors from these organizations will handhold the selected community members and get them up to speed on DPGs, get them to really contribute to these DPGs and help them adopt and help adoption of those DPGs. So that's going to be a pool of 100 people really trained on this, and then that acts as a hook for 10x the number of people, coding talent across the country and globally, to engage with this DPG builder ecosystem, to again learn about these DPGs and contribute, typically like an open source community. The idea is to catalyze that open source community, which partially addresses the challenge of sustainability and the challenge of adoption that got talked about.
Thanks, Gaurav. I have the next question for Neeraj. So, Neeraj, Actually, I have two questions for you. One is that you said that this field is full of jargons, which I agree. Right? Nobody understands what is the real definition of DPGs and DPIs, and sometimes they get so lost in it as stakeholders. Right? They don't know how they can contribute to the entire ecosystem. Right? So I would want to understand from you that there's different people sitting out there in the audience, right? From the startup community, government, private organizations, NGOs, so on and so forth. What is the role that each one of them can play? Firstly, in trying to understand DPGs and then trying to contribute to the space.
Thanks a lot. And I was just listening to the conversation, and I was remembering when I got my first email ID, I actually paid for it. And now I think we're at a stage where I think even Gmail used to charge for email IDs,
Yes,
if I remember
yes.
correctly, some decades back. But the world has changed. I think that's pretty much what we're seeing. We're at an inflection point here. Uh, I think most importantly, what I'd like to say to all of you who are working on digital solutions, so there's a very fragmented space. There are not enough DPGs out there. The jargon is confusing, it's complex, etc. But there are organizations like the DPG Alliance, like Digital Square, who have very clear frameworks of what a DPG is. So, I would encourage all of you to actually go take a look at that. Maybe ACT, you could socialize some of that because that really gives you a broad outline of what is a DPG. That is why they're also, what is a DPG? And they're also, you can get a certification. Like recently, Digital Square actually certified this Google solution, FI. That's right. I see you know a little bit more about the jargons than I do. Uh, so thank you for that. So they got certified and they got very excited. And I met the Google folks and I said, why are you so excited? Because this is how they're going to actually move forward. And again, Google will probably end up making some money out of it like Google does with everything they do. But that's fine. As long as you've got people at the center, you've got impact happening, I think that's important. I think there are also not enough DPGs. For Digital Square, I think we've certified till now only 35 DPGs. And we're working in, I don't know, 50, 60 countries. So there's a lot to do. If you think about what's come out of India, anybody know what DIVOC is? DIVOC? Can I see hands up? DIVOC? Hey, come on. Abhishek is from Digital Square. He doesn't count. Yeah, well, DIVOC is the digital public good behind the COVID uh, certification, and that's a DPG now, right? Anybody know what eSanjeevani is? Probably some of you might have heard of that, right? The telehealth platform. It's converting into a DPG. We're actually helping Sri Lanka roll it out there. So, but there are a handful. We need a lot more. And that's also the direction to go. I was talking to somebody who's got a roaring business in supply chain and a fantastic back-end system. And I said, yeah, but it's eventually going to get obsolete. So why don't you think about converting it into DPG? And he says, but why would I do that? This is, it's my design and all of that. I said, well, you would help roll it out in multiple countries. You probably can make some money while you're rolling it out. In any case, sitting in your shelf, it's of no use to anybody, So I think the penny did drop, and hopefully we'll see that. So I would just encourage you, look at the overall frameworks. There are frameworks out there. There's a lot of jargon. Don't get into that because there are people sitting at the G20 trying to talk about that. Let them figure that out. And you were also there, as was I. but don't focus on that. Focus on the overall frameworks. Focus on certification. Once you do get certified, you kind of make it to the front end, and you can start sort of rolling some of this stuff out across. So that's what I would say.
Vishal, quickly, I have one last question for you. So, basically, since Neeraj touched upon how can the stakeholders understand more about the space, I want to particularly ask you about the IT industry because Gaurav was also mentioning that every government for deployment also needs a tech person. So, how can the IT industry come together for this initiative and really work on the sustainability of the DPG ecosystem?
Yeah, probably you need to find out more people like me who left their IT job and leave, come back from US and started working on a social sector. It would be very difficult. But tech companies, look, for tech companies everything is money, right? Until unless they see a money in, right, none of them will jump into it. Can social sector become one of the vertical for them, right? Means they see financial services, insurance, healthcare, manufacturing and logistic. Can they see social sector as in one of the vertical? Means if that can be seen like that, then why not? Means they will suddenly turn around and start seeing it, right? Means that's a practical situation for them. The second thing is, um, there are certain tech companies, means in last 2 years I have talked to certain companies who are totally focusing on the social side, right? Means common platforms, Synergy Connect. I see Dhwani RIS, right? There are certain tech companies who are totally focusing on the social sector, and we started realizing that until unless we work with them, right, we cannot really take this to the scale, and we really cannot do the quality job which we wanted to do. So if you show them money, then they will come back, right? And then somehow if you can figure out a way um, to there is a big change in happening. And if you go in Europe, right, means banks are putting their marketing as in we have done this kind of a social work in a global landscape. They are not talking about their product or services and all. They're talking what social impact they have done. And that's a mandate for everyone now, right? Means the way our kids are growing, they really want to work with a company which has motive attached to it, which has doing a really impactful work. That's the thing. If industry has to tap in, then they need to look at this sector. They need to do the impactful work, and that's where the link exists, right? And that's where we need to tap on.
So the last thoughts you
No,
would
I was just going to say that I think we should just forget about the IT industry as a organized sort of corporation and look at the IT industry as consisting of a million people who understand IT. So don't go to the balance sheets and the P&Ls of Infosys or Wipro. Go to the people at Infosys and Wipro and convince them to come and work on this.
And you are right. Means I work for TCS, Infosys, Wipro, all of them in US, right? Means you talk to them, you will find out a one good guy out there who can help you out.
So, although this topic is of keen interest to me, and I would have asked you a lot more questions, we have to unfortunately end the session um, because the room is required ASAP. But some of the key things that I take away from this conversation is that there is the entire concept of digital public infrastructure, which is coming up, and that is why it is given a lot of importance to something like DPGs. Creating an ecosystem like UPI, replicating it for other sectors like healthcare as well, wherein the public sector develops a DPI and the private sector contributes by developing DPGs. Then working very closely with the government, figuring out the priorities and ways in which some of these DPGs can actually be taken up by the government and providing them constant tech support to ensure sustainability. And most importantly, finding good tech guys to actually who can work and you know create some of this some of the really robust digital public goods which can be adopted at scale by the people. So these are just a few insights for me. I have to wrap up this session.